Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another Astoria Bookshop virtual book event. I'm Christian. I am one of the booksellers at Astoria Bookshop, and I'm very, very excited to be doing this event today for Natalia Sylvester's Running, which is a contemporary YA that has just recently come out and one of my favorite reads of this year. So before we begin, I'm going to introduce our author here today. So Natalia Sylvester is the author of two novels for adults, Chasing the Sun and Everyone Knows You Go Home, which won an International Latino Book Award. Born in Lima, Peru, she grew up in Miami, Central Florida, and South Texas, and received a BFA from the University of Miami. Running is her YA debut. She lives in Austin, Texas, and it can also be found at nataliasylvester.com. So thank you so much for joining me today to discuss this wonderful book.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for hosting me.
Yeah, of course. I had the pleasure of reading this book about 2 months ago, and I absolutely loved it. Like I think I told you before, like I usually don't read any contemporary YA. It's very rare for me. Mm-hmm. And I devoured it and loved it so much. It was so good, and I really loved everything about it. So I'm really happy to be discussing it today with you.
Thank you. That means so much to me. I really appreciate it.
For everyone who is watching, I'm going to begin asking my questions. So my first question is to tell us more about Running and what inspired you to write it.
Yeah, absolutely. Running is the story of a 15-year-old girl, Maddie. She's here on the cover. She is a Cuban American teen living in Miami. Her father is running for president, right at a time that she's discovering her own personal and political beliefs and realizing that they don't align with his. So she, throughout the course of the novel and throughout the course of this campaign, she has to decide if she's going to speak up for her own beliefs, which would mean speaking out against his. And it's really a story of her journey to really her own form of activism, just finding her path in that and what that looks like. And the reason I started writing it, it's funny, I started writing Running in July 2014. No, 15. No. Oh my gosh, wait, hold on. 2016.
It's still a while back.
Yeah, it was a while. Well, it was during the election. And so it's funny because I think, because time has no meaning anymore. So it's like,
right.
But no, it was during the election. And I remember one morning I was watching the news. I was sitting on my couch having my cereal, and I'm just there you kind of just see whatever's on. And they were playing a candidate's speech. And for some reason I just wasn't even listening. I kind of started listening to the speech, but I got so hung up on this candidate's child in the background. It was a teen who I kept wondering what is going through their mind right now. Mm-hmm. They had this look on their face I couldn't make it. I was like, is it pride? Is it disappointment? Could it be all of that? And so really that's what inspired Maddie's characters. It's the inner conflict that's coming through in this public way. And what do you do with that? So I really just started writing it, from her voice. And because I had written adult novels in the past, I didn't actually know at the time that I was writing YA. It wasn't until I sent my agent the first 30 to 70, I forget how many pages I sent her, but it was the first ones. And she was like, I love this. And she said, you're writing YA, right? But I was also really happy when she told me that, because it made sense in the way that I love reading YA, and especially in that time in my life, if I look at what I've been reading predominantly during the last 2 to 3 years, that's where I've been going. A lot of YA contemporaries, and that's what was filling my creative well, for lack of a better term. And I also realized I do try to think a lot about who are we writing for, and when I think of the story, I wasn't thinking of the adults in the book. In terms of this is a story for them. It was really more no, this is about Maddie, and I hope the hope would be that other teens similar to her would be the ones who connected. So that's really how it came to be.
Yeah, no, it's just like, you know how much I enjoyed it, but it was really interesting to see that this was like your first YA because it was so well done.
Well, thank you.
And especially like, so it kind of goes into my next question, but so like Running takes place in Miami, and you are from Florida yourself, from Miami. So like, and now that you live in Texas, if I'm not mistaken, so how did it feel like revisiting Miami slash like Florida through writing this, and like what sort of research did you do to bring that to life within the novel? Because even though you are from there, like it must have to take like some research to do to kind of give it like, you know, it's a life of its own.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and absolutely, like, even though I no longer live in Miami, like before the pandemic happened, my husband and I, we visit, we still have family, so we're in Miami like 2 to 3 times a year sometimes.
Yeah.
Do you think this, this act of physically revisiting really helped me revisit on the page with new perspective? Because like so I lived in Miami between like the ages of like 4 and then 9 and then again 13 to like 24. So I was in middle school, high school, and college in Miami. And during that time, I really don't think I could have fully appreciate just how unique it was because it was like my own, you know?
Yeah.
And so kind of similar to like what Maddie says, there's this part in the book where she realizes that not everyone, like not the rest of the country doesn't necessarily look like Miami does. And she hints that she didn't know that until she left, when she went to go visit her dad in DC during, when he's in Senate sessions and everything. So I feel like that mirrored my own journey in writing this book. And like every time I do visit Miami, not right now because of the pandemic, but there's always this moment of realizing how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. And just having those references really helped me realize like what are the things that make it so unique and what are the things that I love about it? What are the things that I really want to make sure to capture?
Yeah.
But then the research aspect definitely, because the book revolves so much around politics, was really just trying to make sure I understood, like that I was still in tune with the local politics at the city and statewide level, and kind of learning about what kind of legislation is affecting life in South Florida, and that ended up really informing the book a lot because there was some legislation that almost really, I think it was in the 2018 section while I was writing that. It ends up being at the heart of this book, and I won't say too much about it, but basically it passed in the House and the Senate, and then it got vetoed at the last minute by the governor. So in a way, running is almost like this alternate reality in which it went through, and what could have happened as a result. So I think, it was really very much like a mixture of like drawing from memory, drawing from the things that strike me once I visit, drawing also from the things that I like, that I really fully want to appreciate and celebrate, but also the things that I can see that as a community, we still need to work on. Like we talk a lot about representation in books. And, this book certainly, like, for me is kind of like a love letter to like all the diversity of the Latinx community. And I think that like we can't, like we all want to be represented in books, but we can't expect to only be represented in the ways that were beautiful, without also being able to take a look in and say, hey, here are the things we need to work on. So it was just my way of being like, I'm writing this all from love, but it doesn't mean that I don't have for lack of a better word, like criticisms or places where I can say, hey, actually, this isn't great and we need to like figure this out.
No, that's a really, really wonderful point. Like, especially, which is why I like, one of the reasons why I love the book is that it was, like you said, such a love letter, but also like very much like pointing like a spotlight on like the criticisms that, we all should really examine and kind of like have a discussion on, which is really great for my next question, because the relationship between Mari and her parents are so like unique and nuanced, because she's really like, her dad is going for like the presidential like bid, and like her mom is like really supportive of her husband, but also like she has her own political past, and like it is very much like at odds of what he's going for, and like she's also, and then Mari herself is also going into her own identity politically, and it's like kind of like clashing at so many different ways. Like, how was like what were the challenges of like writing that, and like where like what experiences did you draw to like really show like such a really unique and like nuanced like relationship between the three of them, because it was really well done and like very like unique in the way that like you addressed like the issues between all three of them.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that question. I'm always really fascinated by relationships in books, and this book so much was an exploration of power, and so what are power dynamics within relationships. And in Maddie's case, it wasn't just about the power that her father wields politically, but really just like when you're a teenager, your parents have a lot of power over you, and so how does that, I can't remember the amount of times when I was a teen I felt pretty powerless. And so to find a way to like shed that and to actually realize that there's a lot you can do and that there's a lot you do have agency over, and to really embrace that, I thought was just a really important journey to highlight. But definitely like it ended up also being an exploration of like gender roles and gender dynamics, and the ways that who has most authority in Maddie's household. Is it her father? Is it her mom? And how does gender play into that? And when does it start? When do the cracks in that foundation start to show? When does she start to question it? So I would say like it's funny because the relationship between Maddie and her dad was always really pretty well formed for me. Like it was pretty crystal at the beginning, because it was the one at the center. Like I knew, like even just the one sentence, log line of the book, it's about Maddie and her dad, right? So I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that, like, as a result, the first draft really didn't develop her mom at all. Like,
wow.
And no, to the point that I actually, by the time I got to like the second half of the first draft, I didn't remember what her mom's real name was because I hadn't used it in so long. But also, she calls her she calls her mom Mommy. But also, like, it's an embarrassing thing to say. Like, as a feminist, like, as a writer, like, in all these different levels. And so that really clued me into this idea of, like, wait a second, why have I not fully developed Juliana's character? And it ended up making me realize, like, she's always been in the background. And, it's almost like my writing process mirrored her life, in that, her husband always took center stage, and she was just kind of like this supportive rock, and maybe not as noticed, like her needs weren't being as heard. And so it really gave me this, it made me really, in that second draft, really focus in on her and be like, because I do feel like, I believe that like when you're writing something, even though like there's so much that's going on the page that you're consciously writing, but if we're not paying attention to also what's happening in the places that we're not looking, we're missing out on like everything, right?
Yeah.
For me to realize like, oh my God, I haven't paid attention to Juliana, it suddenly like made me turn around and be like, and all along this has been happening, It just then became, okay, I need to really bring that to the page.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like her and Maddie's relationship ended up being one of my favorite and most surprising to write in the book.
Yeah, it was one of my favorites in the book, honestly. Like there was a scene, like I don't want to reveal too much, but like there was a scene, I think at like towards like the end where she's like arguing with her husband, and like I think like I forgot what he says, but it's basically like, why aren't you like siding with me? And she's just like, I think like she says something along the lines of like, why do I always have to side with you? Like, why aren't you coming? Like, why aren't you supporting me?
Yeah.
And it was just like, I was like, oh, finally, like, it's finally like getting there, because it's just like so much of it is focused on him, and you're just like really like rooting for her, like, because like these bits and pieces of her throughout the book, and then towards the end, and it's just like you're like, wow, like she really should be like the forefront of this instead of him.
Yeah.
But it was like such a really good relationship between the two. Like Maria and her mother, like was such like you really wanted to like know them more.
That makes me happy. Yeah, it's kind of surprising to realize like this isn't just Maddie's journey; it's also her mom's.
Yeah, very much. It's very much both of their journeys, really. But yeah, before I get into my next question, so if anybody watching has any questions, you can put them in the comments, and we'll try to get to them at the end if we have time. But my next question is actually a little bit more deeper into the book, where because you cover so many topics within running, like you cover climate change, you cover like teen activism and activism in general, the importance of voting in both like local and statewide elections, and like colorism within the Latinx community, and like LGBTQ rights, especially with Gloria. Like that whole relationship was really interesting, and like really made me think about things too. How did you approach intersecting like all of those like issues and like discussions in the book, and doing it in such a, at least to me, like effortlessly, like really well done, and like just like really perfectly, like we're going to touch on these issues and I'm going to do it in a way that is like well done, but also like requiring the person to like do more research, and like obviously there's a deeper conversation there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. It's funny. I feel like I've gotten that question once or twice because people do seem to be like, "Hey, how did you intersect these things?" And it's a little bit like in my head, I think, but life is intersectional. Like that's actually the reality. So it wasn't. It's not to say that it wasn't hard, because I mean, writing is hard. That's just the point. Writing is hard. But I will say that was not the. I think what would have been more challenging would be to write a book that only had like one issue that never intersected with anything else, because that's actually not how life works, and that's not how our world works. And to write it that way would be a complete disservice to the reality and all the people who live all these experiences. That even if Maddie as a protagonist, and who Maddie, there's power in who you center in a story. And Maddie is someone who's like really learning so much as she goes. So really in the beginning, there's times when I didn't agree with her really, like, as a person. And that was hard to write, because I didn't want to give her, like, I didn't want to just be like, I'm going to transplant my knowledge into your thoughts because I want them there. But the thing about it is that when you're someone who's paying attention and really open in the way that Maddie is, I think that was the beauty of Maddie. And she's in this moment in her life when she's absorbing and questioning and, open to like everything around her all of a sudden. And when you are in that place, you do start to see the ways that things intersect. And you do start to see the ways that, like, even though your experience might not match that of somebody else's, it doesn't mean that you have to erase it or not see it. So yeah, maybe I didn't get to, like, maybe this book is not a book that's specifically about LGBTQ rights, right? It's not like it dives into like at a plot to specific point. But that doesn't mean that she lives in a world where those things aren't gonna that there aren't like people in her life who are queer, and people in her life who are like being really hurt and harmed by the policies of people like her father. And for her to for me as a writer to not write that would be ignoring and erasing it. And so I just think it was important that, like, we might not have time to delve super deep into everything, because again, I'm in Mariana's point of view. And so, like, as much as I would love to, like, as a person, I have to think of like where she is. And I think like later on in the book, she's, she starts to see things in a better, like in a more in-depth way. But there was this point at which somebody asked me, like, hey, have you thought about maybe, like, since you don't get too far into these issues, should we maybe take them out? And I was like, no, because editing is just as active as writing. You know, it's still a choice, and it's still like what you're choosing to interact with in the world all around you. And I feel like, you know, I might not be someone who can speak to every experience, but my role is like I think I can use my voice to A, at the very least not erase, but B, to try to amplify and try to make it so that, you know, like bring visibility and, you know, perspective to all the different experiences. And that's why like so much of what Maddie is like encountering has to do with like privilege, and it has to do with colorism within her community, and it has to do with like the different ways that, you know, people within the Latinx community have different privileges based on even where they came from, you know, in terms of their immigration experiences, and just in the ways that climate change affects people differently based on their wealth, you know, or lack of it. And so like that was just really important to me, and I think that was like that's the heart of the book essentially.
Yeah, I think what really resonated with me, and I'm sure a lot of other readers, is that like Mari, like she doesn't know everything, and she's only a teenager, so like she is learning, and like everyone has to start out at the beginning. Like, you know, like not everyone is like just like immediately aware of like all of like the different marginalizations and like oppressions that people face. And I think what is really great about it is that she is learning as she goes, and like she is like not like she is aware that she has a lot to learn, but she is very much open to doing that, which reflects a lot of teens now. Like they are learning as they go, and they're not like, especially like when you said, you know, you wanted to like insert your own thoughts and like own stances on things into her, and just be like, okay, like this is like how she's gonna be. It's like, no, like she has to start off somewhere and like, you know, build from there. And I think, which is why the book works so well, is because, you know, it's like showing an authentic, at least in my mind, like way that, you know, people are going to start off somewhere and like begin somewhere when they want to be, like get into activism and like be aware of like the oppressions that people face in their own communities and outside of that. Which goes into my next question, kind of with the election very, very soon. What do you hope for writing to do for young adults, and like where, if you have any like resources, like where should they start if they want to make a change like Mari and her friends did in the book? Because they basically started from like very small like things to doing a lot of bigger things in their own community.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up, because I think like to me that was one of the big things that I was learning in the book, was that like we don't ever come to anything perfectly formed, you know, and that applies to the movements that we join, you know, and you have to kind of like Manny, like you have to be open to realizing that it's okay. But it also means that you're coming to it as a student, and like there's a certain humility that has to come through it to understand like, hey, if there have been others doing this work for a really long time, what can I learn from them? How can I decide to help? You know, instead of, you know, I think one of the things I never know like what to tell people in terms of what I hope they'll take from this book, because I do feel like that's a very personal thing, and I hope they'll take something very personal. So I don't want to like my own opinions on that. But I will say like what I took writing the book was just even the craft of it, when I was just trying to decide like what's the movement at the heart of this that will that will be the catalyst for Mari's change. At first I felt like it had to be really big, you know, because we're writing a whole book about it. It needs to be larger than life, right? And then the more I was writing it, I realized it's okay that it starts like somewhere close to her. It's okay that it's not like on a global level. When we feel like that it automatically needs to go from zero to that, then it's unattainable and it feels unsustainable. And how can we expect to continue to be inspired if we put those huge expectations on a movement or on our own activism, right? And in my case, I've just been writing this book. So, and I think also we talk about small things, but they're not small at all. They can really create like huge change. Like if one thing that you do, either inspires somebody else or helps even one person, that's a huge thing. That's their whole world for that one person. So I think that I would say, like, for people who are new to activism, especially young people, I think you really, like, it's okay to maybe like join a lot of different groups, like find the thing that will speak to you from like this really deep place that will be like, yeah, this speaks to me at my heart, you know, because that's where you'll be able to give the most to it. Because activism can be really draining too. It takes a lot of energy, and it can often feel like 2 steps forward, 4 steps back. You know, like the way progress and change happens isn't in a straight line sometimes, or rarely really, as we see even just now in the moment that we find ourselves in. And we need to be able to last in the fights that we come to, you know. And even just that word, like in the fight of it, right? There's this moment where Maddie realizes that her anger doesn't need to be something that she uses as a weapon. Instead, she can use it to protect those she loves. And I feel like if we can try to like find the thing that at the heart of it is where your joy and your love are coming from, because that's the thing that will fuel you. You know, I carry a lot of anger too, and I often feel angry, but I don't know that if that were the one thing fueling me, I don't know, I think eventually I'd burn out a lot faster than if I didn't have like a community that I love and want to, you know, support and protect through my activism, because that brings so much more meaning to it. And I think that's the other part of why it was so important for Maddie to find friends that provided that for her. And I would say that would be important for people who are new to activism too.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think a lot of people assume that like anger is like the only thing that you can like really use to like make change with, but it's like, no, like it's a lot of different things, and like eventually like the anger will like go away and it will burn you out, but it's just like a combination of like having support within your community and like friends and a bunch of other different like resources to have while you're doing the fight, quote unquote.
And it's not to say that like it's not to even speak ill of anger, because anger, especially as people of color, especially women of color, like our anger, our voices can often be just dismissed as angry, and that, I mean, that's not, and that's something that that isn't fair, right? And our anger is valid. Like the anger of anybody who's been marginalized is absolutely valid. I just think that it's often rooted, and I think that's what people who criticize that anger fail to see as well, is that so often it's rooted in love and in just this basic human desire to just be seen and heard and treated as a person. And so it kind of works both ways in that like, you know, we need to be able to embrace that root of it too, in order to like to fuel us. And it's okay if we're angry. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know.
Speaking of anger, my favorite question, which I was very excited to ask. So for people who are watching, there's a character named Joe, and he is like, I guess like the best way to describe him is like Maddie's dad's I wouldn't say assistant, but like political aide.
Yeah, he is.
Right? Yeah.
He's kind of been like, he's always been at Maddie's dad's side and probably had more important roles, but at this point, even though he doesn't realize it, he kind of is like his aide, like his personal aide. Yeah.
But my question is basically, can we talk about Joe and how annoying he is? Because I have so many thoughts on him. as like I'm sure you saw in my review, I was like, I really wish the only thing I wanted to see, and it's like a very small thing because it's a perfect book, is that Mari would curse him out because I was just like, he deserved it. Like like it just goes to show how Mari is such a good person because I was just like, she had every right to like really give him like every single thought of hers about him because he is such a terrible person.
Right. You're right. When I saw you said that, I was like, oh man, you're right. That would have been so stupid. Right that. Yeah.
But it really does go to show that she is like, you know, there's so many other things to be worried about comparatively to like this really annoying and really like just like every time you like said something, I'm just like, God, you are so terrible.
No, he really is. And in a way, like, it was kind of gratifying to write him because I got to take out like all my annoyance and anger toward people like him into him.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't want to do it in a way that was a caricature. Like but also like, there's just, I mean, he really, I think the most annoying thing about him is that he doesn't know that he's like that. And so then he just kind of like progressively gets worse.
Yes.
But you know, it's funny because I was thinking about the process of writing him, and I went to this workshop while I was writing with Cristina Garcia, and it was a generative workshop. And there was one day in the workshop where she said, "Write your oppressor." And although there are many in the story, I really honed it on Joe because like I hadn't, like it just for some reason I just was like, let me like figure him out. And I ended up writing like this whole, like, God, I wish I could find it now. I think, but it was like this whole like little rant that he had written about how supportive he is, even though he's a white man. Like he's super supportive of he of course would say of Hispanics. And
of course, yeah.
And then in that rant, he justifies it by saying, "My first crush was a Spanish girl in kindergarten," and it was just like, oh gosh, yeah, that's exactly who he would be. Like he sees like diversity as this way to get points for his campaign.
Right.
And like I had like these notes. It's funny. I found like some of the notes from that, and it was like, list a few things you know about him. So I had like these little notebooks, and I had written, Joe will die of old age, peacefully and painlessly, but bitter. And then I put, he believes intentions are all that matters. And just like things like that. Like he basically is someone who just fails his way up. And hasn't had someone call him on it. And I do think that in a way, I think that Mariana, a lot of the things that annoy him and annoy her and Joe are things that she hasn't yet been able to, at least in the beginning of the book, she hasn't yet been able to articulate that they also really bother her, seeing them in her dad. But she loves him so much, and she doesn't love Joe. So she loves her dad so much that she's not able to see that. And I think that's probably one of the reasons he ended up being a really important character. It's just because I think that it is hard. It's hard to criticize someone you love. It's hard when you are completely at odds, and yet there is still love. And so and then we attach guilt to it. We attach all these feelings, and I think for Maddie, and I think a lot of us, we have to figure out like, well, how do we hold those we love to account? And what does it mean to like, what if we can't change them, what do we do then? And I think that was also a really big question for her. Not to give away anything in the book.
It's really interesting that you bring up the point that like Joe has a lot of qualities of her father, and like which, like thinking about it now, it's like like a lot of the same like ideologies that he has is like very much reflective in her father, and like because she loves her father so much, and like was like that was her hero, and like she really like, you know, sometimes heroes fail you, and like that's really hard for her to like get around at first. Like, you
Mhm.
know, that he's really like failing her and failing a lot of like people that she loves in her life.
Yeah.
Um, which is like a really, yeah, a really good point. Cause like I'm like thinking about it and I'm like, wow, yeah, like a lot of the things that Joe does and like says is very much like things that her father stands for.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. And it's funny because it's one of those things I hadn't entirely realized until really like when you when you mentioned Joe, and I was like, yeah, man, what is it about, you know? And
I,
I like it's weird the things you learn about a book and the writing of it even after it's done, like
right.
even writer, yeah.
It's just, it was just like you like you wrote him so like convincingly because it's like very much like I definitely have known people like that, and I'm just like, why don't you see like the like your self reflection levels are like very low, and like you don't realize they don't realize that they're very much like even though that they say they're for diversity and like
Mhm.
inclusion and like they're for the people, and it's just like very much like no, you're not. Like you really realize that you're not, but they just keep going and keep like somehow like getting higher and higher where they are, and it's just like how are they doing this?
Yeah. And I think
But
too, because he only sees Mighty as someone, like as a piece that he needs to control.
right.
So, so long as she behaves and so long as she is in service of the campaign and her father, and, you know, by that same, you know, in that same line, Joe, so long as she's in service of him, then he's fine with her. And I think that's how a lot of people don't realize when they, even if they say they're for inclusion and everything, it's only so far as we're not like somehow mixing things up too much and making them uncomfortable. And then that's when things go wrong. And so he kind of like really epitomizes that.
Yeah. And it's like really interesting that you bring up the point of like kind of like controlling her as like a piece of the puzzle of like the campaign, because like she's really the only like problem.
Mm.
So like to this whole thing where it's like her brother is much younger, and like which I actually want to ask about, like how was it writing her brother, because he's very much like a child, like very much a lot younger than Mari, but like he has this like own realizations, but like it's very much like a difficult like I don't even know I would say journey, because he's still on that journey at
Mm.
the end of it. Because like he is very much like blindly like following like their father's like you know ideologies and like you know rules, and like that I think there was a really good conversation in the book where like Mari talks to him like very frank and is like, why are you like just going along with this? Like, why are you not questioning anything?
Mm.
And it's just like, I think he says something like, but like I would lose my friends at school or something. I remember like a conversation that happens between them where he's like, you know, if I say anything, like I lose my friends at school. And it's
Mm.
like a very simple reason. And like, you know, as a teenager, like even like a young adult, it's like that shouldn't be like your reason for following along. But for very much for him, is like that's his whole world.
Yeah. You know, I think I find I love that because I do think that, you know, I see the ages of the characters, especially Maddie and Ricky, as also ways that even just adults can be. Some of us are younger in the journey than others, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like Ricky and Maddie are kind of like they're in these different points in the path, and he is still someone who's just all in, and he hasn't thought to question anything. Um, and when he finally does have to, like, gosh, that can be really jarring too. And so, um, yeah, I think he he's I enjoyed writing him a lot because there is still something, there's still a longing for it. I think the innocence is something we do more and once we lose it. And we know
Yeah.
that as much as like like as much as being ignorant to anything is not a good thing. Um, I'd be lying if I said sometimes I do miss um, some of the happiness of it. Like not, you know, and to know that that's a privilege to have certain things that we weren't aware of at a time.
Yeah.
And be like, gosh. But then there's also like this other side of it that's like, and I think this is part of what Money is, that she's like, even when I was okay, so many people weren't. And that's not right. You know, and she sees that even within her own friends, just the ways that the privileges she has had, and the ways that once you see something, you just can't unsee it and you can't ignore it.
Yeah. I think like especially because like the morning of like, for her at least, like the morning of her like her relationship with her dad, because it's like very much like seeing him become like from a hero in her eyes to like a villain essentially, like, and that's like really, especially with like the conversation around like, oh, like coming from such a, like a conservative like background, and like, you know, having all of these like ideals of like of going against that is like really hard, because it's like, you know, it's very easy to say like, oh yes, like I am very much against that, like I will cut off everyone who is like for this, and it's like that's really easy to say, but like when your father is like the face of like this, and like you have such a close relationship with him, and it's like that is very like nuanced and very difficult to like reconcile against like who you know, like who you know as a person, and like your father as like the political like person that he is.
Yeah. And also just the intersections of all that, right? Because so much
right.
is personal, and so much political is moral, and so much of you know, I think it, like for me, it was especially important to write the ways that it works within our community, because I remember at one point early on in my own activism, somebody had said to me that they had assumed that this one Latinx legislator was progressive because, you know, because he was Latinx. And I just thought like, oh, it's so like, it's so frustrating to have A, to be seen as this monolith, but B, to also then, I think it's a dangerous way of erasing the ways that we also need to look at the, like, at the own, like, at just like the divisions within our community, and also the ways that even though we have experienced marginalization and oppression, that doesn't absolve us of then turning it around and replicating the same systems. It doesn't mean that we, just because we have, you know, have experienced xenophobia and prejudice based on our ethnicities or race, that we can't then turn around and, you know, be racist towards others within our own community and even outside of it. And so it's just, there's just all these nuances there that that I thought like we need to actually be talking about. And we need to be able to see it on the page reflected.
It's like a lot of, I can imagine people being like, oh wow, that's so interesting for like a Latino man to like be running conservatively, and it's just like, no, like just me reading it, I'm like, this is very much like a thing that I've like seen in my own family, like extended, and like it's just like this is the reality of people. Like a lot of Latinx individuals like are very conservative and like are very much, and it's kind of like really hard to reconcile sometimes, because it's just like you're going for the same things that like are going against your own people.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's just a very like, especially for like a teenager, it's like, how does that make sense? And it's just like, it's like so rooted in like white supremacy and like just like whiteness in general. It's just like very insidious. And
yeah, it's like becoming, it's like this way of like becoming like, as long as we're white pleasing and centering, but then that ends up, that just means that we're being anti-Black and anti-Indigenous and all the, and not just even like also homophobic and completely toxic masculinity, like all these different things that I know that there are many of us having those conversations within our own family, and it's not an easy thing. And at the same time, I also feel like we also need to understand that that's not the only thing we can be doing, because sadly
Right.
there are going to be people where we can't. Like, and not only within our community, but outside of it, there are going to be times that we can't change a person's mind. But does that stop our actions? Like, does it mean we give up?
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it should. And so, yeah, that's something that I was hoping to explore in this book.
So there's I only have like a few more questions, but there's you mentioned, I really enjoyed this and it made me feel like very nostalgic for my own family. You mentioned I Love Lucy a lot, and like the whole like idea, like Ricky and like, you know, like just like what inspired you to do that? Because like I found that very like comforting in a way, and it was just like it felt so nice to like I got the references and everything, and I was just like, this is like really like I have a titi who loves I Love Lucy, and I'm like, this is very much like something I would see in my own family. So like it was just like very comforting. So like what made you include it in the book?
Oh, that makes me so happy. Actually, it was my obsession with I Love Lucy. It was absolutely like when I was, I think, 12, I was living in Mission, Texas, and this was when Nickelodeon would play Lucy really late at night, and everyone in the house would be asleep, and I would be sitting on the couch, like trying so hard not to laugh too hard and wake everyone. Because I fell in love with it. I just completely and I don't know, I'm sure there's a bunch of different reasons, but, and it's something I've carried through, and I have an I Love Lucy doll that my husband's aunt, who was also hugely obsessed with I Love Lucy, she gave me this like vintage I Love Lucy doll, you know, and like, so that, you know, you see like that Lucy doll makes a cameo in Running. And I think part of it was, and kind of going back to that whole like the joy at the heart of things, is it's like when I'm writing, even if I am trying, like this book, like I said, really explores power and explores oppression and power dynamics and all those things. But I also, I feel like for me to sustain a project for however, like the amount of years it takes me to write a novel, like I tried to make sure I'm looking at it through a lens of joy. And so oftentimes I will kind of lend from my own experience and add it into a book, you know, or borrow from my own experience and add it into a book. And so I kind of made Maddie like that part of myself, because A, I felt like I could feel like more connected to her that way, but B, because I wanted the book to celebrate joy and to celebrate and to be kind of funny at times. And I think also there's something really interesting in the ways that like, even though, so what felt really revolutionary to me as a 12-year-old watching I Love Lucy was the moments when Ricky starts speaking Spanish. And even though even though I know that at the time they didn't have the technology for like to caption it and to translate, the fact that they weren't translating felt like revolutionary, because it felt like, hey, you know, there's all these people that won't understand it, and that's okay because it doesn't have to be for them. And then the people who will understand it, it's like you can revel in that joy. You know, and so, you know, and then learning all the ways that like Lucy really fought to make sure that he got cast in it, because they really were like an American man, you know. So it
was very much like in the back of my mind, like reading it, I was like, this is like so funny, because it's like there's so many like revolutionary things that I Love Lucy did just by like existing, and it's just like it kind of like lends itself to like kind of the things that Mari and like Running does in the book. Like it's just very much like that is a different fight, but it's still a fight.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's so cool. I love that you brought that up. I feel like you're the first person that's brought it up.
I truly enjoyed it. Like it was such like a nice like thing for me to like get the references, because I'm like, wow, like very much like you, like I watched them very late at night on like Nick at Night, and like, you know, I had like family who really loved it, and like I know, like I have like basically osmosis like so much information about I Love Lucy from them, that it's just like I just like when it came up I was like, oh my god, like yes, like I get this is like something that I very much relate to. So yeah, I really appreciated it just coming up. It was just like such a nice thing to include. So my last two questions are very straightforward. So what are you reading right now? If you are reading anything, because I
Oh
know
my,
it's very hard to do that during this time.
no, so I'm reading Bethany C. Morrow's A Song Below Water.
Oh yes, such
Oh
a
my
good
god,
book.
it's so good. It's so good. And I and it's funny because one of this is like not even like a huge part of the book, but it's one of those things that made me completely geek out in the beginning because one of the main characters is an IB student and like an international baccalaureate student, and I'm like, oh my god, I was an IB student, and I've never read a book with a before.
Not many books. I feel like I wasn't one, but I know a lot of my friends, like when we were in high school, were IB students also, and I'm like, I only know about it from them, but like I've never really seen that either in like books, and I'm like when I saw that, I was like, oh my god, like that's like
Yeah.
somebody else knows about it.
I know, right? I was like, I thought this was like, I thought there weren't that many of us. And then in its own
Right.
way, I'm like, oh wow, it's its own little culture that would be an interesting thing to write about. But no, I'm loving like just the voices, and I'm terrible at talking about books. Sadly. So in terms of plot levels, the more I enjoy a book, the more I suck at talking about it. But it's really great, and I'm also next I'm going to be reading Brandy Colbert's The Voting Booth. I'm really excited about that.
Which book? I'm sorry.
The Voting Booth by Brandy
Oh
Colbert.
yes. I've heard really great things about it. I have it. I have so many books that I have to read that I'm like, I have it on my list. I have to get to it soon. But yeah, I heard it's really great.
I've heard awesome things.
I'm really excited for it.
Yeah.
So before we get to, we have we have one audience question, but before we get to that, what are you working on next? Because I know like some things from what you posted on Twitter, and I'm really excited for it. But what are you working on next?
I am. So my next book is another YA book, and it comes out in 2022. And so I'm working on. It doesn't have a title yet. It has a code name, which is really fun. It's like my publisher and my agent have been calling it the Mermaid Project. So it's about a Peruvian American teen in Central Florida who is she has hip dysplasia, which is a condition that I have, and like I grew up with having very many surgeries growing up as a child, and it's really about how her navigating the actual physical displacement within her body, but also outside of it as an immigrant living in Central Florida, all while at the same time she's auditioning to become a mermaid at this mermaid attraction. So I'm having a lot of fun writing that.
That sounds so great, honestly.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to read it eventually.
I can't. Yeah, I'm excited for it to be out in the world. And my one sad thing about it is that I was supposed to go to mermaid camp this summer for research, and I was going to train to be a mermaid. And it got
no!
But I'm just like hopes and dreams. I've always wanted to be a mermaid. So now I just get to like channel it all into the book.
Yeah. Oh no, that sucks. That actually sounds like really great.
Right?
Like to do for research, you can just be like, yeah, I'm going to mermaid camp. This is for research.
It would be so cool. And like Zoom. Like I'm gonna just talk to mermaids via Zoom.
I mean, that works too, but still, damn, that sucks.
They were gonna put me in a tail. Like I was gonna have pictures with a tail. So I'm very upset about this.
Well, I'm hoping for the best so you can actually do that because that would be amazing. But our audience question says from Franca Berti. So when I write, it's autobiographical. Was that the case for you when you started writing? If so, at what point were you able to lift off and away from stories being rooted in your own life?
Oh, interesting. That's a great question. I think that when I first started writing, when I was little, it was always poetry, and then when I started writing like stories, they were often very autobiographical, and I think they still are, just not in the ways you'd expect. My first book, it was me trying to learn a little bit more about my family history, and then my second book, it was really like autobiographical, not in the literal sense, because it dealt with like a Mexican American family living on the Texas border, and even though I'd lived on the Texas border, like the experiences were different, but I was trying to speak to like the like parts of the emotional journey that felt autobiographical and that I felt like I wanted to sort through and process, and so I do that through the writing. But I think to me the beauty of like I think inevitably you put yourself into the book because you can't help it. Like into your writing, it's coming through your lens. Everything is being filtered through you. And I think that when you reach a point where you are, like you say, being able to lift off and kind of start to either fictionalize, but you're still rooted. Like I like how you said, even just that word is rooted. You know, there's a connection there that's like a really deep one. And I think there's that, to me, that's like the beauty of writing, is it's like, how can you take the things that this inward journey and actually make it an outward one? And that it's not just about us anymore, because like we are part of this big world. And so by looking inward at ourselves, are we not also learning about the world?
That's such a good answer. Yeah, I mean, so it seems like that is it for us.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Or Frankie.
Yeah.
I know her. I'll call her Frankie. I know her.
Oh, great. Okay. So thank you so much for joining me and having a discussion on this wonderful book. As a reminder, you can buy Running from us on astoriabookshop.com. We have a few copies in store, and we do ship. So if you are anywhere outside of Astoria, Queens, we can definitely ship it to you. But thank you so much for discussing this with me, Natalia. I really appreciated it. I'm really looking forward to everything you're doing after this. So.
Thank you. Thanks so much for everything. I hope we'll be able to meet in real life one day. I really enjoy it.
Hopefully, eventually, yeah. But have a good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.